I'm Wendy Chun. I'm a medical geneticist and pediatrician and the director for clinical research at the Simons Foundation. And I want to welcome you to what I hope is going to be an interesting and educational series of talks that we're going to have. I wish we could be in person. I was so looking forward to the family meeting, being able to hug you guys and see everyone running around and swimming and having lunch with you. But alas, not this year. On the other hand, I do want to remind you we still have full plans to do this next year, summer 2021, August 2021. So I know this is just a sort of temporizing measure until we actually get to be in person. I hope everyone's doing well. I know around the world we're all dealing with SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 in our own way, but I hope you and your families are doing well. This family meeting is an experiment for us, an experiment both because it's online, but also because we're actually bringing groups together. So it's something we haven't done before. Please, please, please tell us how we can do it better. I'm sure it won't be perfect, but I hope it is helpful. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome the families for Hive P2, Set BP1, Med 13L, and CSNK 2A1. As my son would say, it sounds like Star Wars, R2D2 and C3PO. But even though it sounds like a lot of letters and numbers, what it really is your family members that we care so much about. As we're doing this, we've been bringing together the groups across conditions because we do feel like there's some common features and some common lessons learned. And so we've got a core group of speakers you're going to be hearing about today that we hope are going to be helpful to demystify some of the genetics in terms of your genetic test reports and understand that gobbledygook, as well as some of the issues that you may be dealing with behaviors in your family member. And so we thought those would be helpful across the conditions. So we're going to share that, but we're also going to be having some me time, some breakout time that'll be over this weekend, and then next weekend we can have the individual family groups be able to meet together, hopefully learn together, and most importantly, being able to put forth the issues, the questions, the concerns, the things that we as researchers and as people working together with you need to hear about from you. And I want to share that some of my greatest insights have been through hearing from you, seeing your kiddos at family meetings, being able to appreciate the things that you've observed because you're with your family members 24/7, and being able to give us that direction so that we help to steer things in the right direction. I will say you're going to hear from several of us in terms of what we see coming forward. Some of these gene therapies, for instance, are going to be cross-cutting across conditions. So I hope that in that way, you're going to be able to also gain some insight into how what we learn in one condition might help us in terms of learning in another condition. So while there are commonalities, I do want to emphasize one thing that people have heard me say before, but I'll say again, which is everyone matters. Although these conditions are individually rare, collectively they're more common, but they are still individually relatively rare. And when it comes down to individual genetic variants in those genes, it's really, really important for you to be represented and to have your voice heard in the research and importantly in the treatments that we're going to be developing. So with that kickoff, I really thank all of the speakers who've been both here today, who have recorded their sessions in advance, who are sometimes doing this without power from a Starbucks. But thank you, everyone, for all of your dedication to this. Thank you to the family leaders. Thank you to the families. Thank you to Lindsay, who's done a great job of putting this together, and all of our AV team at the Simons Foundation. So next up, we have Kevin Beers, who's going to talk to us about empowering parents, understanding your child's behavior.
Great, thanks, Wendy. So we're very happy to have Karen presenting. Karen Beers is a PhD and an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Washington. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology, as well as her master's degree and PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Florida. Prior to joining the team at the University of Washington, she served as an associate research scientist at the School of Nursing and Child Study Center at Yale University and associate professor at Emory University, where her work focused on parenting interventions for children with disruptive behaviors. At UW, she directs the RUBI clinic at the Seattle Children's Autism Center. Research pursuits focus on the developmental evaluation and implementation of evidence-based parenting interventions for children with autism spectrum disorder. So we look forward to you hearing Karen's presentation.
Hello, well, I'm really excited to be speaking today. I'm going to be talking about ways to empower parents. And a key that you'll learn in that is that if we can understand your child's behavior, that holds the key or to unlock the door to how to think about how to change or address behaviors. So empowering parents, understanding your child's behavior. So my goals today are to first just talk about why behaviors are happening, or to help us better understand why a behavior is occurring. Because as I said, that's the key to helping us understand how to think about addressing it. Part of that process is learning how to assess your child's behavior. So I'll be talking about some strategies, tips, techniques that you can use to learn how to assess your child's behavior. And then we'll move into some brief suggestions around treatment options for challenging behavior. So those are the goals I'm hoping to accomplish today. So the starting place is to talk about 4 key concepts to help us think about behaviors and understand behaviors. And the first thing is that there's this understanding that behaviors are learned, that something happens in the environment that sets up a likelihood for the behavior to happen, and something happens in response to the behavior to send a signal that maybe that behavior is a good thing to keep doing or maybe something to stop doing. And that setup is what helps an individual learn a new behavior and potentially continue to do that behavior. So I want to use toilet training as an example. As we think about those moments where we've done toilet training with our children, we as parents do a lot to set up the child for success. We get the little toilet, we get the step stool up to the sink, we get the little soap dispenser, we might have a little pictures on the wall of the learning potty, and then we look for those signals that our kiddo is ready to go. They may do the little pee-pee dance or wiggle, and we see that, and we go and then take our child to the toilet. And at some point, hopefully, they successfully join. And then, of course, as soon as that happens, what do? We respond with cheers and stickers and lollipops and all these things that send the signal to the child that, wow, what I just did must have been a really cool thing, so maybe I should keep doing that. So the environment set up the likelihood for that behavior of going to the bathroom or the toilet, sets it up, and then our response signals that that behavior was actually a really good thing. And that process is what helps set up this learning that happens. The child learns that going to pee in the potty must be a good thing to do, so maybe I should keep doing it. And we might see a similar process plays out when we're thinking about challenging behaviors, that things in the environment and the responses to the behaviors set up a signal that maybe this is a behavior that works for me. So I want to actually show a little slide that demonstrates that learning process, specifically in the context of tantrums and tools to clean up. So where we start is that a child is maybe given a command, go pick up your toys, and the child responds to that command by running away and screaming, as their way to say, yeah, I'm not interested in doing that right now. Well, let's imagine as the child is running away and screaming that the parent is like, I am having a day, I just cannot deal with this, so I'm not going to follow up. And the parent in that moment removes the demand, but the child no longer has to clean up. And again, it makes a lot of sense at that moment. If the kid's given the parent a hard time and the parent is having a hard day, maybe not up for kind of really pushing through that compliance. So the parent removes the demand. What happens while that makes sense for a moment, it also sets up this kind of learning opportunity for the child. That, wow, when I'm told to do something that I don't want to do and I run away and scream, mom or dad actually backs off. And so that refusal ends up being reinforced. And so the question, of course, is what's going to happen the next time the parent gives the demand? Well, again, we might have said this cycle of, hey, I've learned in the past that when I scream and run away, I don't have to do it, so maybe that will work again this time. So this is kind of a learning process that is happening. What's interesting about this particular example is it's not the child acting in isolation. This is a dyadic relationship or a dyadic interaction that's happening. So I want to kind of talk about the other side of learning that's happening in this particular example. So we have a kiddo who runs away when given a demand to clean up, and tantrums, the parent removes the demand, that noncompliance is reinforced. The parallel process that's happening is that when the parent removes the demand, the kid stops screaming and running away, and that kind of unpleasant tantrum stops. which in the moment is kind of a good thing, right? So removing the demand in that moment is not necessarily a bad thing because again, the tantrum stops. So the parent's removal of the demand is also reinforced. And that might set them up for the next time to remove the demand again when their child maybe reacts in a way not so pleasantly to the demand of cleaning up. This is, again, just to kind of illustrate this learning that is happening or to kind of connect that we think about behaviors as being learned. When I'm talking with parents about this in clinic, the simple thing that I talk about is this idea that this is an illustration of what's called short-term gain, long-term pain. Because when the parent gives into a tantrum, it stops the behavior in the moment. The blowout stops, so that's a good thing in the moment. There's that short-term gain. But what's happening over time is the child's learning that screaming and having tantrums is what works for them and keeps doing that. And so we end up, even though the tantrum stops in that one moment where the parent removes the demand, the tantrums actually continue over time because that's the behavior that works for the kid. So when we're thinking about what we want to do in treatment, it's oftentimes trying to reverse that cycle of when giving a demand, even if the child's upset, that you follow through and you kind of teach the child that tantruming doesn't work anymore to get out of it, which is not going to be fun in the beginning. There's a little short-term pain, but it's getting us to that long-term gain of having the tantrums go away because the child learns they no longer work for them. So, but anyway, just an illustration of how we think of behaviors as being learned. Wanted to give one more example to kind of illustrate this idea of how behaviors are learned. So here we have Charlie, who's a 7-year-old boy who has difficulty falling asleep as well as frequent late-night waking. And yet he does have an established bedtime routine. When his parents go to bed, they do sleeping activities like taking a warm bath, reading books together. And then for this kiddo, when he's supposed to be falling asleep, his mom will lie next to him until he falls asleep. However, if his mom attempts to leave, at that point Charlie would start crying, whining, and follow her out of the room. And he then immediately calms down when she returns. Then again, she stays in there and falls asleep. When he wakes up in the middle of the night, Charlie then goes and wakes his mom and asks her to return to his room, which is what his mother eventually does. So what I want to think about is that these behaviors of, crying and whining when mom leaves the room, or going and waking up his mom and asking her to return to his room, what is he learning in response to those behaviors? And the answer hopefully you're coming to is that he's learning that if I whine, follow mom, that's how I get her back into the room. Or if I go wake up mom and ask her to return, that's how I get her back with me. So if that's what he's learning, and I think more importantly, those behaviors are working for him, that's what is going to perpetuate or continue for him to use those behaviors to try to get mom back. So behaviors can be learned. Another important concept about behaviors is that they can be adaptive or maladaptive. And that just means, when we think about treatment, oftentimes we're focused on the maladaptive behaviors, hitting, screaming, elopement, noncompliance. Those are maladaptive or problematic behaviors that we want to change. But I think a very important part of treatment is not just to kind of hyper-focus on the maladaptive behaviors, but also to think about the adaptive behaviors, or what do we want to see instead of the challenging behaviors, or what new skills do we want to add to the child's repertoire. So it could be getting dressed, putting the seatbelt on, brushing teeth, making a bowl of cereal, picking up toys, whatever it is. Just to acknowledge that in treatment, it is just as important to acknowledge there are behaviors we want to see more of and behaviors we want to see less of. And so in treatment, we should be focusing on both sides of those, that we want to build skills and capacities as much as we want to potentially target some of those more challenging behaviors. The third one is a really, really important one. It's the idea that behaviors are forms of communication. Simply put, when a kiddo is engaging in a challenging behavior like hitting or ignoring a demand or screaming, that is a form of communication. The child is trying to tell you something through those behaviors. And I would challenge parents to just stop for a minute and ask themselves, what is my child trying to communicate or say through this behavior? And that is going to be part of the key to understanding what to do about it, or to understand why it's happening. This is especially important when we think about kids that have any form of language delay. For those children, they are even more reliant on their behaviors to communicate their wants and needs. And what kids sometimes find out is the most effective way, it's not the most functional or the best way, but the most effective way to communicate my wants and needs is through challenging behavior. But again, I just want to go back to this really, really important point that when a child is engaging in challenging behavior, they are trying to tell you something. Our job is to try to figure out what my child is trying to communicate or say through this behavior. So here's a little visual illustration. So it's a very sad, unhappy little girl here. She's crying, she's holding her hair, she's closing her eyes. The question is, what is she trying to communicate through this very sad and upset behavior? It could be that she saw a little treat, a candy bar, or cookies or something up on the counter, and she can't reach them, and there's no one there to help her. And so she is crying and closing her eyes and holding her hair as her way of saying, I really, really want that treat. That's what she could be communicating. Conversely, she could have been given a really, really hard thing to do, like go pick up your room, or go do your homework assignment, or help me in the kitchen, or whatever. And so instead, it could be that this closing her eyes, holding her hair, and crying is actually instead trying to communicate, this is too hard for me. I can't do this. I'm feeling overwhelmed. And this example is illustrating a very, very important point, that we cannot make assumptions from the behavior alone of what's going on or what we need to do about it. We have to understand what that behavior is communicating in any one moment in time, and appreciate that sometimes that one behavior of crying and closing your eyes can be the child's way of saying, I need something, and sometimes that closing the eyes and crying and holding the hair is, I can't do this, this is too hard. So we want to be really thoughtful about, in one moment, what is my child trying to communicate through that behavior. And that gets us to the fourth key component. So just to review, we've talked about how behaviors are learned, that the environment sets up, and the response to the behavior helps set up a learning process that helps us helps behavior be learned, that we can be targeting adaptive and maladaptive behaviors, that they serve a form of communication, and that behaviors serve a function. Their job is to get a need or a want met. So I had mentioned the little girl maybe wants the cookie, or maybe she wants to get out of a really hard task. Those are two examples of functions of behavior. And there's actually kind of four categories altogether that we think about. So the first one is escape, and that's what I was just saying with the little girl. Some kids engage in problem behaviors as a way to get away from something. And the versus events, a versus stimuli. It could be a task or a demand like clean up. It could be a particular person. Sometimes we hear kids have a really hard time with a particular peer in their classroom. And so they engage in behaviors as a way to get away from that person. Or maybe it's a place. You take them to a noisy cafeteria or a shopping mall, and they start screaming. That might be their way of communicating, I want to get out of here. I want to get out of this place. So escape is one category. The second category, the fancy ABA word is tangible, but really what we're talking about in that category is that a behavior is happening in order to get what I want or get access to something. So in that former slide, her crying about wanting the chocolate bar, that was serving that tangible function. She was trying to get access to something. Oftentimes this is a preferred toy, like for example, you take the tablet away and the kid is starts screaming. That's their way of saying, I want that back. They want that preferred toy. Or maybe it's a food, maybe it's a favorite video. But at its core, the child is communicating through that behavior. I want that back, or I want to get access to that thing. The third function is attention. And this is really just the core focus of the behavior is to try to get others' attention. The classic example is the parent who's talking on the telephone, and prior to that, the kid could care less what the parent was doing, but the moment they get on that phone, all of a sudden they really need their parent's attention, and then they start interrupting or pulling on the parent's arm or whatever. Those are all behaviors that are communicating, pay attention to me, I want your attention. The last category is an interesting one. We call it an automatic function, but just practically speaking, it's just talking about behaviors that the child does because it impacts how they feel internally or inside. And this can kind of go two different ways. Sometimes the behavior that they do creates a pleasant internal state. It feels good to do that behavior, or sometimes it reduces an unpleasant state. And I'm going to use hand slapping as an example. I work primarily with kids with autism, and hand slapping is a behavior that we see in our children. And sometimes our kids are slapping their hands because it's a positive sensation that it creates. They're calm. There's nothing big going on. They're maybe walking, kind of pacing in the room and kind of slapping their hands. So they're just doing that behavior because it's kind of a positive internal stimulation. There are other times when kids might slap their hand as a way to self-soothe, right? Maybe they're in a really, again, loud space or crowded space, or they're being overwhelmed in terms of sensory input, and so they engage in that behavior as a way to calm themselves or how they feel inside. And that to kind of wrap that up, it's acknowledging that automatic function has little to do with what they get from their environment. It's more about how that behavior impacts how they feel inside. Where the other functions, the escape is getting away from the stimuli or event in the environment. Tangible is getting access to something in the environment. Attention is getting attention from a person, or that automatic is more about what's happening inside the child and changing kind of either creating pleasant sensations or maybe reducing negative sensations. So these four functions are important because when I ask the question, oh, my child's engaging in hitting, and I ask the question, what are they trying to communicate through that hitting? The answer is tied to one of these functions. They're hitting me to try to get out of something, or they're hitting me because they want to get access to something, or they're hitting because they know that I'll pay attention to them when they hit. Or, well, hitting for an automatic function is probably not as common, but that's kind of the way that we think about trying to tie, thinking about the behavior and what is it trying to communicate. So that kind of makes sense in theory, but it might be hard just to kind of figure it out just by looking at the behavior. And so we actually use what's called the antecedent behavior consequence model as our way of doing the detective work to try to get at the function of a behavior. So I want to talk through this ABC model, and then we're going to do an example to kind of see how this all maps together. So the starting place is just to talk about what an antecedent is. An antecedent is the trigger or the cue that sets off the behavior. So I said, you might have a child that hits. We would ask ourselves, what happened right before that hitting that set that behavior off? That was the trigger or the cue for that behavior to happen. And that would be our antecedent. So maybe the sibling of the child came up and took the toy, and that triggered or set off the kid hitting the sibling, right? So taking the toy was the trigger or cue or antecedent to the behavior of hitting. This is just a list of common antecedents that we see. So things like demands, like go sit down, go get dressed, go clean up your toys. Restrictions, so saying no is oftentimes a trigger or a cue to challenging behavior. Taking away something the child really likes, if they're on their tablet and you take it away, or you have preferred food and you take it away. Or for some of our kids, the onset of kind of negative stimuli. So like I said, loud noises, crowded spaces, bright lights, these are things that may actually serve as antecedents to problem behavior. So antecedent is the thing that happens right before the behavior that is kind of responsible for or triggering the onset of the behavior. Next up is the actual behavior we're talking about. And it's just what the person is doing. It's what we see happening. I say we would describe the behavior in a way like it's what I'm seeing if I was watching it. So I almost call it like the sports announcer effect. So, oh, the child is picking up a toy and throwing it at his sister, and now he's running out of the room, and he slammed the door, and then he screamed at mom, and then he went in his room and slammed that door. So I'm literally describing the behaviors. That's a really good way to kind of talk about what is the B in ABC model, having very descriptive behaviors. And that's different than saying, oh, the child had a tantrum. Because the reality is, for any one child, a tantrum can look very, very different. Instead, I would want to be very descriptive about what the tantrum looks like. What behaviors did I see in the context of that tantrum? You say you've done a good job of describing a behavior if you described it in a way that it could be timed or counted. So I could count how many times a person uses the hits. I could time how long they scream. I could count how many times they swear. I could time how long they are running around in the room. So those are just examples of how you can measure a behavior. So our antecedent is what sets off the behavior. Our behavior is obviously what we're wanting to work on. The consequence is what comes after the behavior. And what we would say is all behaviors have a consequence. But that doesn't mean that it's something that might actually change behavior. We actually define a reinforcer or a punishment as a type of consequence. A reinforcer is something that increases the likelihood a behavior happens. A punishment is something that decreases the likelihood that a behavior will happen in the future. So if you give a consequence but the behavior doesn't change, you haven't actually given a reinforcer or punishment. You've just given something that follows the behavior. And we say consequences can be planned or unplanned. So when you are using things like sticker charts, or you have a clear first-then board where if you pick up your toys, then you can have your tablet, that would be a planned consequence of giving the tablet. Conversely, unplanned consequences are just things that happen by happenstance. So, the example of the teen that comes home late and the parent walks up and says, "That's it, you're grounded." That is a consequence, but it probably was an unplanned and maybe unexpected consequence. So I would say our goal in treatment is that we really focus on planned consequences. All right, so I want to go ahead and put this into practice. This is the exercise that we would have you do. If you had a behavior that you wanted to work on, we would have you take data to not just understand the behavior, but also what set it off, which is the antecedent, and what followed the behavior. And we use all of that information to try to hypothesize the function of the child's behavior. And all of that information helps us understand, or again, to hypothesize what is the child learning in this situation. This is an example of a data sheet that you might use. It's pretty simple. It just has the date that something happened, and then you describe what happens before the behavior, that's our antecedent. You describe the behavior, which is what's happening during, and then what happened after, which is our consequence. So we're going to use this data sheet to try to do some ABC data collection on a video that I'm going to show you. So let's give this a try. And I want you to watch this and look for the behavior, the antecedent or trigger to the behavior, the consequence, and then we'll use that information to hypothesize function.
Can I have a brownie?
Oh, not right now, honey. All right, it's lunchtime.
But why?
Because it's lunchtime. It's not time for brownies.
Open it.
I said it's not time for brownies.
Open it.
Don't.
Open it.
All right, you can have one brownie. That's it now.
All right. So I want to give you all just a minute to think about, and honestly, sometimes it's easier to start with the behavior because that's the most obvious part. So what were the behaviors that you saw? Let's be really, really specific. And then what was the antecedent to that behavior? What set off or triggered that behavior? And then what was the consequence of that behavior? So I'll give you just a minute to think about that. There's the answer on the next slide. Okay, let's go take a peek at what I wrote down. So I said that the answer, well, also the behavior. I put the word tantrum down, but that's actually not a good behavior description. What we want to be is really, really specific. So what I saw is the child stomping his feet, yelling, open it, shoving it in mom's chest, repeating the demand. So those are kind of clear behavior descriptions of what the tantrum actually looks like. And I would say that the antecedent to that was mom saying no. he would have been perfectly fine if he had asked for the brownies and she said yes. But set off that tantrum was hearing the word no, not right now. So that was the antecedent. The consequence was, Mom, after his stomping, yelling, pushing, Mom gives him the brownie. And so I want to point out, sometimes people will say, well, the antecedent was he wanted the brownie. And to clarify, just wanting it didn't set off the tantrum, because he could have wanted it, and again, Mom could have said yes. It was actually wanting it and Mom saying no. The no was actually what specifically triggered the behavior. So we had the function is to get what he wants, or to get access, right? What he was trying to communicate through that stomping, yelling, pushing, repeating the demand was, I want a brownie. I'm trying to get what I want, which is a brownie. And in this particular situation, that seemed to work pretty darn well for him. So if we were to ask ourselves, what did he learn in this situation? I think we could say he learned that stomping and yelling and pushing and repeating and being persistent is what gets me what I want. And so I would expect for this child that the next time he wants something, he's going to move into those behaviors, because that's what worked for him in the past. All right. So, I sometimes say to parents, this can feel like a lot of busy work to try to track a behavior and antecedents and consequences and functions, and why do we have to do all this work? And so I want to do an illustration of why this information is so important. So I want to take two kids, both in the classroom. Both are given a math assignment. Both kids turn their classwork into a paper airplane. Both start talking to their neighbors and making silly, disruptive noises. And in both situations, both kids are sent to the principal. Now, I would say this is a really logical consequence, right? You got a kid that's being disruptive, other kids can't learn. So sending him to the principal or her makes a whole lot of sense. You're kind of removing the disruptive kid. But let's imagine that kid number one hates math work. It's really, really hard for him. He struggles. It's not fun. And so all these behaviors, so he is a kid that is trying to get out of doing the math, right? And so the teacher sending him to the principal, while a logical consequence, is not going to be an effective one in the long term, right? And in fact, it's actually inadvertently reinforcing his disruptive behavior. What the kid is learning is math is hard, so when I'm given a math sheet, if I act up, I get out of doing the math. And I want to really kind of highlight the idea of logical consequence versus effective consequence. So kid number one is an escape kid. Kid number two loves his peers' attention. He likes that he's the class clown. Everyone's looking at him. They think he's funny. So he's trying to get his peers' attention to these behaviors, a completely different function. So kid number two, sending him out of the classroom, actually is a really good choice, because it is disconnecting him or cutting off the function of his behavior, which is to get his peers' attention. These examples are important because they illustrate that the behavior itself does not tell us what we should do to treat the behavior. It just characterizes what's happening. The thing that tells us what to do about the behavior is knowing the function of the behavior. Why is it happening? What is the child trying to communicate? And if we can figure that out, then we're going to end up landing on smart intervention strategies instead of just logical. So just to illustrate kid number one, we take some data, we get our antecedents and our consequences, and we hypothesize escape is the function for this kid. Well, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to make sure that he first of all is not given a whole math sheet, but maybe just one problem at a time. I'm going to make sure that the teacher is close by to provide support. I might set up a reinforcement system that if he does one problem, he can take a break. And I might also set up a reinforcement system of, when you finish your math sheet, then you can go on the computer. But you can't go on the computer until you've done your math sheet. But I'm tailoring all of those strategies around the idea that I want to address the function of the behavior. Most importantly, I'm not going to let it escape. I'm not going to say, go to principal. I'm going to change. Kid number two, if I realize that the function is attention, I might say, hey, here's the deal. As soon as you finish your math sheet, you can get up and tell 3 jokes to the class. So I'm giving him what he's after, which is his peers' attention, but it's for on-task behavior instead of off-task. So just to highlight, the behavior itself does not inform how you treat it. It's the function of the behavior that informs how you treat it. Oh, no. Escape, maintain, attention. So I've kind of given some insight to how how we even think about moving into treatment. That is, we have to know what the behavior is, we have to know what sets it off or what's the antecedent, we have to know the consequence, and we're going to use all that information to inform the function of the behavior. That's all and good, but once you have some working hypothesis, the question, of course, is, well, what next? What do we do? And so I want to talk through some classic strategies that we use to address behaviors that are mindful of the function of the behavior. So the first strategy that I want to talk about is one of my favorites, and it's doing things in small doses. This is, prevention strategies are essentially antecedent management strategies. It's the idea that if you can identify what sets the behavior off, that antecedent, and either change it or eliminate it, you are going to eliminate the behavior, right? If a kid, for example, always has, tantrums when they're told to clean up, in theory, if you never ask them to clean up, they would never have tantrums. Now, that's not a solution, but that's just an example of how impactful changing an antecedent can be. So doing things in small doses is one antecedent or prevention strategy. And the idea is that sometimes it's just how the task or demand is presented that sets off behavior, right? It feels too big, too long, too onerous, and the child just senses that and moves into disruptive behavior mode as soon as they feel like something just feels too hard. And so, and the function usually is escape. You're telling me to do something really big, really hard. I don't want to do it, so I'm going to act out in a way to get out of that. So here we would use small doses. And the idea is that you really get at the heart of what's setting off the behavior, which is the big task. And so here we might say, well, let's just get smaller tasks. Kind of like that prior example. Instead of doing the whole math sheet, maybe we just do one problem and take a break. Instead of cleaning up the whole room, we just say, okay, we're just going to work on you putting your clothes in the hamper. That feels way more doable for a lot of kids than the bigger command. I kind of joke about if someone came into my house and said, Karen, clean your house, I would run for the hills. But if someone said, Karen, just put your dishes in the dishwasher, I think I could manage that. So sometimes it's just about the size of the demand and making it way more palatable, easy for the kid to be more willing to comply. And along with smaller size of tasks, there's also shorter duration. So, I hear from a lot of families that wow, I take him to the birthday party or the family picnic and it's just, he melts down. And so I might say, well, this might be a situation where we don't have to avoid it altogether, but maybe if we know that your child is usually good for about 30 minutes but kind of falls apart at 35 minutes or more, then we just work with that. And we say you go to the family gathering for 30 minutes, or maybe you take two cars and one parent stays and the other takes the kiddo home after the 30 minutes, or maybe you let them be around for 30 minutes and then you go to take a break for 15 minutes and then come back. But you're being mindful of kind of the child's bandwidth for that activity and being responsive. Same with meals. We don't take our kids to the 3-course dinner. We don't do that at all now because of COVID, of course. In pre-COVID days, if we went to a restaurant, we wouldn't go to the 3-course meal. We might go to McDonald's. And even self-care. Maybe in the beginning, if the child's not brushing their teeth at all, it's just brush your teeth for 10 seconds. And then it's 30 seconds, and then it's 45 seconds. But we acknowledge that the actual task is not happening because it probably feels too big. Can we make it a little easier for the child? Changing the order of events is really acknowledging that no kid likes to stop something fun to do something not so fun. I don't want to come outside from playing to come in and clean my room. I don't want to turn off the TV to get ready for school. And so it's about changing the order and ensuring that your routines are designed so that fun activities are happening after. Oh, as soon as you clean your room, then you get your tablet. As soon as you finish your schoolwork, then you can go outside and play. Changing how you ask is just acknowledging that some kids are sensitive to the way demands are presented, and especially if it feels unexpected, like kind of dropping in and saying, get off the tablet. If they don't know it's coming, that could potentially set off challenging behaviors. So we think about being more planful about, how we say things and how we set the child up for success. So, a classic example of this is providing choices. So if the child comes in and says, I want ice cream for breakfast, instead of saying, no, you can't have ice cream, knowing that no, the word no is actually an antecedent for a lot of kids. You say, oh, it sounds like you're hungry. Would you like some pancakes or waffles? Or or I had one kiddo who just wanted to wear turtlenecks every day, even if it was 90 degrees outside, and this was a fight every morning. No, you can't wear your turtleneck. Instead, it was, oh, do you want to wear this shirt or that shirt? And providing the choices that still gives some semblance of, power or control with the child, because they can make the selection. It's just with predetermined choices. Warnings are also really, really big, right? That in 10 minutes it's going to be time to turn off the TV, 5 minutes, 2 minutes. What I would add that is oftentimes missing is that we need to present that information visually along with verbally, right? Because even if we're kind of giving a countdown, it still can feel unexpected, especially if the child doesn't really know time very well. So a visual timer or a countdown clock more concretely helps the child understand that time is ticking and that a transition is coming, but there's still that advance warning. And I just mentioned visual cues. I'm a very, very, very big cheerleader of visual support. I say there is a difference between a child hearing an expectation versus seeing an expectation. And so anytime there's an opportunity to show the child what's coming, all the better. So of course, again, use our timers, whether it's a digital timer or there's kind of like little red countdown timers, a visual first then board. Sometimes a choice board is helpful, like if they need to do a chore, you might have a little visual of like 3 or 4 different chores, and they get to choose which chore they're doing, but it's visual. Any way you can add visual support, I think that is just fantastic. And the biggest way that we think about using visuals is actually a visual schedule. It helps the child understand, just kind of what's expected for their daily routine. And it really sometimes greases the wheel around daily transitions. Just for a little picture here. So it's the idea that instead of just saying, okay, we're going to wake up and you got to get dressed and then we'll have breakfast and then we're going to go outside and play and we have to go run some errands and then you'll come home and help me pick up and so on and so forth. You're presenting that information visually because first and foremost, the kiddo might have a hard time remembering all that stuff. But what really can be helpful is seeing visually those moments of, oh, there's something I don't really like to do, but wow, look, there's something really exciting coming right after that. And sometimes just seeing that first then on a schedule works way better than just being told, hey, you need to stop doing that fun thing. Or, hey, there's this hard thing that you have to do. We really want to think about how we can include visuals to help support our kids through transition. So that's on the kind of prevention side or antecedent management. What are things you can do to set a child up for success so that it removes those triggers or cues to a problem behavior? So that's kind of the first side that you can change. The other side is do you change the consequences to behaviors. And one of the most common is reinforcement. And I think most of us are familiar with this idea that we give treats or rewards for the behaviors we want to see more of. But I just want to kind of throw out some really important ideas around reinforcement. One is that there is a difference between a preference and a reinforcer. A preference is something that kids like and they'll happily take, but they're not willing to work for. A reinforcer is something that the child likes enough or so much that they are actually willing to work to earn it. So I use the example of, again, if someone came in and, I said, well, I like chocolate cake. I would happily take a piece of chocolate cake. But if someone came to my house and said, Karen, if you clean your house, I'll give you a piece of chocolate cake, I again would run away and not do it. However, if someone said, hey, if you put your dishes in the dishwasher, I'll give you a piece of chocolate cake, I might actually do it then, right? So there's part of this is like, how powerful is the reinforcer? But the other piece is how big of an ask behaviorally are you making in relation to the reinforcer, right? So that's my kind of properly weighted scales of justice. If the kids are kind of always doing the math, like that sounds really, really hard. Oh, but I really, really like that thing, so I'm willing to do it. It's when the scales flip and that feels really, really hard, and I don't really like that thing that much, but they will not do the behavior because the relationship between the behavior and the reinforcer is just not in balance. We need to make sure that the behavior doesn't feel too hard and the reinforcer sounds really, really exciting. That's the formula that makes reinforcement work. And of course, we want to make sure the behavior is reasonable to start. So it isn't like clean up every toy you own, for 3 weeks in a row, and then we'll go get ice cream. Like that's just way too much. We want to make sure that what we're asking them to do, especially in the beginning, feels reasonable. Lastly, is kind of our thought about reinforcement versus bribery. It's the idea that, you know, if you tell a child to do something and they fight back, and then you say, hey, if you do it, I'll give you a treat, that to us is bribery because you're offering the reinforcement after the problem behavior has happened. Reinforcement is up front saying, if you do X, then you'll earn Y. Plain ignoring is another strategy I think parents hear a lot about, and the ones that they're used to, the way they're used to hearing about it is ignoring the child in the behavior when they're engaging in negative attention-seeking behaviors or just behaviors where no one's getting hurt, nothing's getting broken. You know, we talk about ignoring. But I want to talk about variations of that, which is in moments where the behavior maybe escalates to where it's not safe anymore. And those things, what we suggest doing is keep ignoring the child. You don't have to talk to them or give eye contact or, you know, have a big emotional response, but you can still address the behavior. So the classic example is a child who elopes. Obviously, that's very scary. And our natural reaction is to, whoa, get back here, right, and have a big reaction when that happens. And what we might say is we might ignore the child. We may not say anything, but we're absolutely going to go after that kiddo and redirect them back. So we'll do it as needed to keep the child safe, to keep property safe, to keep others safe, but we don't have to provide attention in the process. The last one is ignoring the behavior, but not the child. And this is for high-frequency behaviors. So sometimes we have kids that, for example, say the same thing over and over again. And we answered that question like 30 times already today. In those situations, what we can do is ignore the repetitive question, but still pay attention to the child. So the example would be if a child comes over for the 5th time and says, you know, what's coming in my car? The parents could ignore that question and be like, oh, it looks like such a pretty dancer. What do you think we should do? How about we go outside and play together, right? So ignoring the specific behavior, but still paying attention to the child. That helps for those high-frequency behaviors. So just to end on some food for thought, you know, I think, you know, I kind of threw all some ideas out there like, oh, just reinforce or just ignore. But I acknowledge that that is not easy work. And that it's not, you know, trying ignoring once or just doing one time of reinforcement that, you know, drastically changes behavior. But oftentimes it's the use of the strategies over time that helps make them work. And that process can just take time. And if we can kind of appreciate it as the child is having to relearn new behaviors, then we can appreciate that any learning, if anything, takes time. And so we have to create that space for that learning to happen. The other thing to appreciate is that when a child protests, it can be a sign that the strategy is working, right? It's kind of counterintuitive that, oh, I'm ignoring something and he's getting really, really loud now. It must not be working. But that, what we would say is that it's actually a sign that it's working beautifully. Your child is realizing that tantrum that he used to do isn't having the same effect. So I have to kind of ratchet it up to see if I change things, if that will get the response I'm after. And so I just want parents to know that if it doesn't work in that moment or doesn't feel like it's working because the child reacts to it, that's actually really normal. Again, if we go back to communication, that child was communicating, hey, I used to scream and you like paid attention to me, and that's not working now. I'm going to scream louder, and I'm communicating to you that no, you need to pay attention to me, but acknowledging that that's actually okay, and it actually means that you're doing a great job of implementing the strategy. The other thing is just that, you know, sometimes when parents learn new skills, they want to try everything at once, and I say that sets up a recipe for disaster, which means that we end up implementing a lot of things halfway. And it's much better to just pick one behavior and one strategy and maybe focus on that for the week and really feel good about that one strategy and behavior before we move on to something else. We want clear, consistent implementation. And that actually gets to my last slide. That the key to changing behaviors and working on behaviors is creating a behavior system where when you're implementing something, you're doing it very consistently every single time, and you're creating predictability for the child. What we're setting up is for the child, man, every time before when I, you know, interrupted mom, she would respond right away, but I'm interrupting and she's not responding anymore. And that happens like today and the next day and the next day. Okay, well, maybe this interrupting thing isn't working anymore. That happens as a product of consistency, which creates predictability for the child, and then that follows through. Those are your keys to success. You know, the challenge with behaviors is they are oftentimes what's called intermittently reinforced, which means every so often the behavior works, right? Like a parent will ignore, and then respond. And ignore, and then respond. And it's essentially kind of following the slot machine principle. That is like, I don't win every time I pull the lever, but I win often enough, then I'm going to keep pulling the lever. And that's what happens with kids in their behaviors. My tantrum doesn't work every time, but I just hit, it just worked. I'm going to keep pulling the lever. My last kind of word of advice is pulling from the theme from the motto from the TV show Survivor, which is to outwit, outplay, and outlast. And I think sometimes parenting kind of follows that mantra, that when we are trying to implement these strategies that can really be hard, in line with that consistency, predictability, and follow through, that it sometimes in practice means we have to outwit, outplay, and I think most importantly, outlast our kids when we're trying new strategies. Not an easy thing to do, but that is the key to success. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen, for that slide. And just a reminder to all the participants, if you have any questions, you have a Q&A box or a button at the bottom of your screen, and you can use that to submit any questions you have, and we can address them live. So feel free to take a minute to do that.
I'll just chime in also and say, I know I said to Lindsay when I record this talk, it's like, how do you take essentially an 11-week parenting program and smush it into a 40-minute talk? And that is not an easy endeavor. I don't, certainly claim that 40 minutes would solve all behavioral challenges. It usually is a process and a pathway that we take with our families. But hopefully there were some nuggets in there that were helpful. And again, I think the biggest piece that I'll go back to is just acknowledging that when our kids are engaging in challenging behaviors, that is that form of communication. And our job is to try to figure out what they're trying to say, because that is the key to then thinking about how we can support them or figure out a better way for them to communicate or set them up for success so they don't have to engage in those challenging behaviors. That's the real challenge there. That's the work. So I see, there's just a question about wanting it available to rewatch later.
And to answer that question, yes, this will absolutely be available to watch later. We're going to post it on YouTube and share it through the Simon Searchlight Facebook page as well. So if you're not following that, definitely join that. And these will also be translated into a couple other languages for any folks in communities that are not English speaking. So we'll have this presentation translated into Spanish and Portuguese.
Oh, that's fantastic. So excited to hear that. So I see some questions coming in. I'll do my best to try to answer. So the first from Narissa is, how do we address attention-seeking behavior when we're also concerned about safety in that moment? Such an important question, and it's a stumbling block, I say, that families encounter when they're told to ignore something, and then the behavior escalates, predictably actually, to dangerous behavior. So we talk about in our program, I do the Ruby program, of ignoring the child but not the behavior. And what that means is you can sustain the attention-seeking behavior by not talking, neutral affect, minimizing eye contact, but doing what you need to do to keep your child safe, keep yourself safe, and keep your property safe. So that might be a redirection. It might be clearing a shelf or a table. It might be removing yourself from the space. So obviously, we want you to do what you need to do to keep yourself safe, others safe, your property safe. But what we would acknowledge is that in those moments, you can still maintain the other rules of planned ignoring. Now, the classic example I talk about is with eloping. When a child runs off in the parking lot, our reaction as a parent is to, stop. I mean, we want to help keep our help our child be safe. But sometimes that big reaction kind of compounds the reason, the function of the behavior, right? I want to run away because I don't want to go in there. And wow, I also get this big reaction from mom or dad. And so we say, that's a situation where you would ignore the child. You don't have to say anything. You could try to maintain that neutral affect, but absolutely go get your kid, do what you need to do to keep them safe. So it's the idea of kind of splitting this idea that you can maintain most of the components of planned ignoring, but but also, whether it's blocking, clearing, whatever, to keep your child safe. The next question is from Amber. It looks like my son has zero receptive understanding and no expressive speech. He doesn't understand any spoken, written, picture, or sign language. How can I use this system with his behavior? So this is a really good question, and what I would acknowledge is, if I had a child that came into my clinic and had those skill deficits, I would say the work at that moment needs to be on building some form of communication tool to help, and I imagine that you're doing that type of work. And then the question is, what can a parent do on the prevention side, right? When we think about consequences, which is the child's behavior in relation to something following it, there is that kind of expectation that they would be able to understand what's being expected or be able to communicate themselves what is expected. When we have those delays where that would be really difficult to do, the emphasis would really be in the beginning just on the prevention side of things, while the important work is being done on building possible communication tools and systems, whether it's PECS or an AAC, simple words, whatever, or sign language. So it's just to acknowledge that there is kind of a set of basic receptive language that would be important for consequences to be more effective. Kristen asked, from your experience, do these prevention strategies work well for children with intellectual disabilities? Absolutely. Just to tell you a little bit more about the Ruby program, it was developed specifically for children with autism and co-occurring challenging behaviors, but we've used it with kids with a variety of other types of delays. And I will say in the study that we did, we looked at whether cognitive functioning predicted the effectiveness of the treatment, and the answer is no, which means it works just as well with nonverbal children as well as children who maybe have higher cognitive functioning. And so the strategies that we use in a program like that includes the strategy that I talked about were actually designed for and are a really, really good fit for children with intellectual disabilities. The number one thing for me are those visual supports, how those visual support can work to set a child up for success, clarify expectations, and just support kind of their kind of understanding again of the daily routine, again as an example. But absolutely, the answer is yes, yes, yes. Deborah asked, could you speak about managing self-reinforcing behaviors in a child who does not have a lot of other interests, e.g. stimming, masturbation? So I imagine you might have heard this from other providers. Those automatically maintained behaviors are honestly the hardest to treat, because you cannot go inside your child and flip a switch to turn something into not being reinforcing, internally reinforcing. And unlike the other kind of approaches, which is about modifying the environment or your response or whatever to change behavior. So when we're talking about behaviors that require changing how the child feels internally, that is not obviously going to be a simple process. And so this is, I will say, this is the work of my colleagues that do very, very detailed assessments. I kind of talked through the ABC model and functions of behavior, and there's ways you can kind of just take data as a parent to kind of understand it, but there's also a whole other level of doing that type of assessment work to best understand, I'd say oftentimes, those kind of automatic or self-reinforcing behaviors. And then it's kind of the question of, is there a competing response or something that blocks, for example, or there's something that provides similar self-reinforcement but is a more functional behavior. The other thing I do talk about with parents with those types of behaviors is my goal in treatment would not be to say that a child could never engage in those types of behaviors like stimming, hand flapping, whatever, pacing. For me, the value comes in targeting those behaviors when they interfere with academic functioning, social functioning, or adaptive skills, right? So I say there's kind of a time and place to target those behaviors, but not necessarily unless it's causing self-harm, which some types of self-stimulatory or automatic behaviors do cause harm, physical damage. But if it's a behavior that no one's getting hurt, nothing's getting broken, it's just that child's way of reducing stress and anxiety, or just it's a pleasurable behavior for them. It's not about making it go away altogether. It's about setting it up so it's just not interfering with those kind of skill building, adaptive, academic, social functioning that we want to work on. So I might have a parent where, when they take their child to the playground, that's going to be a place, pre-COVID, I should say, that we would, be mindful of, targeting, pacing and flapping at the playground. But when it's a quiet Saturday afternoon, and I'd say go for it. That's not a time or place to target. It would be the same as me saying, I like gardening. That's my way of relaxing. If someone said to me, Karen, you can't garden anymore, first of all, probably my anxiety would go up, and I would probably just look for something else. And so it's kind of appreciating the role of some of those behaviors. But to my original point, I acknowledge they are some of the hardest behaviors to treat, and oftentimes require a much higher level of kind of analysis and treatment planning to find those things that might block, redirect, or provide an alternative for those behaviors. Next question, how can non-parents help in these situations? I'm a big fan of the more the merrier when it comes to treatment approaches. I would say in treatment, I like to open up to whoever wants to attend, whether that's in person or grandpa or grandma's on the phone while we're doing the sessions. But I also think it's helpful when there's some structure to the strategies, like there's a little plan you're working on. That allows you to have something to share with other caregivers, grandparents, friends, to help support what we'd say is generalization of strategies or skills that you want them to work on. But the big piece is kind of communicating, and again, having some structure or a plan in place that you're able to communicate. Lindsay, I just want to be mindful of time. How long do I have to chat? I could talk all day about this stuff, so.
I was just about to check in. We only have about 2 more minutes, but for anyone whose questions don't get answered, we'll provide follow-up after the meeting.
Okay, great. So Haley wrote, I appreciate hearing the suggestions for high frequency behaviors to ignore the behavior but not the child. Can you give a few more examples of ways to respond to the child that acknowledges them but still reinforces ignoring the behavior? My favorite way of dealing with those high frequency behaviors is creating structure around them, which is that, if there's a visual schedule, I had a kiddo that just loved to talk about the cars that pass by their big picture window in their house and would ask mom, day in and day out to name the cars, label the cars, describe the cars, whatever. And so we just set on their visual schedule that like after snack time was car time. And so we made it predictable for the child that that's when it was happening. I have a kind of a 3 strikes visual that I use with some kids where like it acknowledges that mom or dad will answer their questions 3 times a day. And there's a visual that kind of helps create a countdown for how many times that's going to happen to create predictability, but also for the child to know that when mom or dad is going to stop responding. But otherwise, it's moving into that, like talking with them about whatever in the day and just kind of, again, not responding to that particular behavior. I hope that answered your question, Haley. It looks like Kathy was just asking wanted to get that information into your email. Susanna wrote, what's the best strategy for a 3-year-old who is always throwing things on the floor? The more noise, the better. And many breakable things, what can we do? Remove everything, remove the object. If he throws the food, stop feeding. So can you prevent it from happening? And sometimes it is. If you know that like right now this is a high frequency challenging behavior, are there ways you can set the environment up to lessen the likelihood of that behavior happening, right? Or kind of similar to that automatic function discussion I was having, is there some other more functional way that the child can kind of get at that need, desire, whether it's a noise or watching things break? Is there a way to get at that function that would be a little more functional, right, versus just breaking everything? And then throwing the food, I don't know that I would say stop feeding. Again, it's, at the core is why is he or she throwing the food? Is it to get attention? Is it because it's just automatically enjoyable to do that? Is it to get out of eating? That might help me answer what to do, for example, when food is being thrown. If it's to get attention, I might, do a quick turnaround and towel, and then return to the feeding as an example. I might, for, if it was to be a fun activity, I might say that, if you throw, then, then we're going to put that particular snack away, and kind of making a clear contingency. But again, I want to go back and say the function, knowing the function would be the key to kind of thinking in a targeted way how we might address a behavior like that.
All right. Thank you so much, Karen. We really appreciate you answering all of these questions. And like I said, for everyone whose questions we didn't get to, we'll send a follow-up with a transcript of the Q&A. But in the meantime, we're going to move on to our next presentation, which is Genetics 101 and How to Read Your Lab Report. And there are two presenters for that. Julianne Savat received her Master's of Science in Genetic Counseling from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro in 2015 and started her career as a clinical genetic counselor and research coordinator at Geisinger. During her time at Geisinger, Julianne has worked with families in the Autism and Developmental Medicine Institute and Cancer Genetics Clinic. Julianne is currently a member of the Clinical Genome Resource Team, where she coordinates Genome Connect, a patient registry for individuals that have had genetic testing, and is involved in research efforts using Geisinger's MyCode Biobank. Julianne is motivated to help increase our understanding of genomics and to empower patients to be active partners in genomic diversity. Our second presenter is Rebecca Smith. Rebecca is a genetic counselor for Searchlight, where she works to review participants' lab reports and to answer family questions regarding everything genetics. Rebecca also works at the Autism and Developmental Medicine Institute, helping to make meaning out of genetic testing results with families.
Hello, thank you for joining us today to talk about Genetics 101 and how to read your genetic testing lab report. My name is Julianne Savat, and I will be providing you with an overview of some of the common terms you might find on your laboratory report, and then my colleague, Rebecca Smith, will be actually walking through an example of a laboratory report to help you sort of put all these pieces together. So today I want to begin with an overview of genetics, and I know that for some of you joining us, these concepts and terms might be familiar to you. For others, these might be new terms to you, or this might be a bit of a refresher from whenever you met with your physician or genetic counselor. My hope is to review chromosomes, DNA, and genes to discuss types of genetic changes or variants, types of genetic testing that you might have gone through, and then some other common terms that you might wish to know or that you might see on your laboratory report. And then, as I mentioned, Rebecca will walk through how to review your laboratory report using an example to walk us through all of these terms. One topic that we won't be touching on today, but that we get a lot of questions about, is gene therapy. Dr. Wendy Chung's plenary presentation on August 14th at 2 p.m. will provide much more information about gene therapy, so be sure to attend that presentation if you have questions around this topic. But now on to an overview of genetics and some of the terms you might see on your testing reports. All of you listening have gone through the genetic testing process, and you might have spoken to a genetic counselor or geneticist. So as I said, some of this might be familiar, but my hope is to break it down and to help give you a bit more information as you re-review or walk through your testing report. Each one of us has more than 1 trillion cells that make up our bodies. We have different types of cells, including our skin cells, our brain cells, our heart cells, and these really are like the building blocks of our bodies, sort of like how bricks make up a house. In each and every one of those cells, if we crack it open and look inside, is our genetic material, or our DNA. And our DNA is like our body's instruction manual. Each instruction is called a gene, and in fact, we have so many instructions, so many genes, that I often say that our genetic material is like a shelf of instruction manuals. To keep our DNA organized in our cells, it's wrapped up very tightly into these structures called chromosomes. Typically, people have 46 chromosomes that come in 23 pairs. Our chromosomes come in pairs because we get one in each pair from our mother and one in each pair from our father. The first 22 pairs of chromosomes are the same in males and females, and they're really organized based on size and named based on size, with the first pair being the largest down to the 22nd pair, which is the smallest. The 23rd pair of chromosomes, that last pair, are called our sex chromosomes. Males are typically XY and females are typically XX. As I mentioned, each of these chromosomes is made up of DNA that's wound up very, very tightly, almost like a ball of yarn. Our DNA is what provides the actual instructions for our body, and it's actually instructions for how our body can make proteins. Each instruction is a gene, and each gene codes for a specific protein. We each have approximately 20,000 genes that we inherit from our mother and father, and these help our bodies grow, develop, and work. Each protein has a specific role or maybe a couple roles within the body. Some determine our eye color, others help our heart grow, and others are important for how our brain develops. Our body spells out the instructions in our genes using the letters A, T, G, and C. And our body actually reads through those letters to use our genes as instruction to make those proteins. When reading the letters within our genes, our body actually reads those letters in sets of 3. We call that the triplet code. A set of 3 letters in our DNA codes for one amino acid in a protein, and amino acids are just the building blocks of a protein. So a protein is made up of multiple amino acids, and our body would read 3 letters at a time to make one amino acid. So in this example, our body would read ATG to make this first amino acid, the letter CAC to make the second amino acid, and so on. There are 20 different amino acids that make up our proteins, all coded by these 3-letter sets. So now that we've talked about DNA, chromosomes, genes, and proteins, let's talk a little bit more about genetic variants and what they are. Genetic variants are changes in our DNA. While most of our DNA sequence is the same from person to person, so myself and Rebecca, most of our DNA is the same, we all have genetic changes that make us who we are. Some variants just help make us who we are, make us individuals. Others affect how proteins work in the body and might cause developmental or health differences. There are 2 main categories of genetic variants that we want to focus in on and talk a little bit more about today: copy number variants and sequence variants. Starting with copy number variants, these are genetic changes where a person has a large piece of missing or extra DNA. It's often thousands of extra or missing letters within their DNA. If a person is missing genetic material, that's called a deletion. If they have an extra piece of genetic material, that's called a duplication. So if we think about our genetic material, our DNA being a shelf of instruction manuals, it's almost like a copy number variant is almost like a person is missing books or has extra books within their DNA, their genetic material. Copy number variants are typically named for their location or where they are along those chromosomes. So for an example, we might see a report that says 6p24.1 deletion. This helps us know where in a person's genetic material this missing piece of DNA is. The 6 tells us that this missing piece of genetic material is on one of this person's number 6 chromosomes. When we talk about chromosomes, we divide them into 2 parts, the P arm and the Q arm. The P arm is the shorter arm, the Q arm is the longer arm, and they're divided by this little pinch point here, or what we call the centromere. So 6P just tells me we're on the smaller arm on the chromosome 6. And then the 24.1 tells us exactly where we are along the chromosome. You can see that the chromosomes have a banding or striped pattern, and this is actually what they look like under the microscope. So the 24.1 tells us exactly what band or stripe has the deletion. So again, copy number variants help tell us where that missing or extra piece of genetic material is. Deletion tells us that a piece is missing. Duplication would tell us that we have an extra piece. The other type of genetic variants I want to focus in on today are sequence variants. Sequence variants are genetic changes where there's a difference to the letters within a gene. Sometimes this is a single letter or maybe a couple of different letters. And if we think about our genetic material as that shelf of instruction manuals again, a sequence variant is like there being a spelling change in one of the sentences in one of the books. So a small change, just one or a couple of letters that's different. Sequence variants are typically named based on the change to the DNA and the change to the protein. If you see a C period or a C dot on your report, this tells you what the change to the DNA is. That C period is often followed by a number, so this tells us exactly what letter is changed in our DNA. So in this example, we're talking about the CSN-K2A1 gene, and we're talking about letter 593 within that gene. So if we start at 1 and count up to 593, that's where we're talking about. The first letter, A, in this example, is what letter people typically have at position 593. The greater than symbol is our way of saying is changed to, and then that second letter, G, tells us the letter in this individual. So altogether, this tells us that at letter 593 in the CSN-K2A1 gene, most people have an A, but in this person, they have a G. This genetic change can also be described by the change to the protein. So if you see a P period or a P dot on your report, this is describing what happens to the protein or what change there is in the protein. This P-lyse 198 arginine tells us that an amino acid 198 in that protein, so if we start at 1 and count up to 198, that's the place where we're looking. There's typically a lysine, and this is the abbreviation for lysine, one of the 20 amino acids. But in this individual, they have an arginine instead. So if you're reviewing your report, if you see that C period or that P period, this tells you whether you're talking about the change to the DNA or the change to the protein, and you can break down those pieces after that C period or P period to know a little bit more about what the genetic change is. There are several types of sequence variants that I want to mention and talk through since you might see these terms on your laboratory reports. The first is missense. Missense variant means that one amino acid, one of those protein building blocks, is substituted for another based on a single letter change to the DNA. So in that example that we just walked through, the amino acid at position 198 in the protein is typically a lysine, has been changed to an arginine. One amino acid was changed. So this is an example of a missense variant. Another type of sequence variant you might see is a nonsense variant. Like missense variants, nonsense variants are caused by a change in a single letter in the DNA. Here we can see that at letter 265 within the SETBP1 gene, most people have a C, and there's a little error here, forgive me, this person has an A instead. In addition to coding for amino acids, the 3-letter sets in the DNA also help our body know when to stop a protein. So sort of like a stop sign that says this protein's done, stop making it. A nonsense variant happens whenever the DNA change results in an early stop sign or an early stop signal. So the protein is shorter than typical, and this can impact how the protein works in the body. If you're looking at your report, you can tell if it's a nonsense variant in that P period or that description of the protein change. There'll be either a TER, short for termination, a star, or an X to note that there's an early stop signal. You also might see sequence variants that result in a small number of extra or missing letters within the gene. Insertions or duplications add a letter or several letters to the DNA sequence, like this example here, where there is at position 6073, we typically have an A, and this person has a duplication or an extra A inserted there. A deletion removes a letter or several letters from the DNA sequence. Now, sequence variants that have insertions, duplications, deletions are different from those copy number variants that we talked about a few slides ago, because these only involve one or a small number of letters within the DNA, while those copy number variants that we talked about often involve thousands of letters within the DNA. So to help sort of make that distinction there, it's just how many letters are involved. Adding or removing letters in the DNA sequence can result in what we call a frame shift variant to the protein. As we talked about earlier, the body reads that DNA sequence in sets of 3 letters. If we duplicate just one letter, like in this example, it will shift how our body reads the remaining letters and can change the remaining amino acids in the protein and eventually lead to an early stop codon. You can identify frame shift variants on your report because they typically have the letters FS in the description of the protein change. Those insertions, duplications, and deletions of one or a few letters can cause these frame shift variants. So now that we've talked about genetic variants, so copy number variants and sequence variants and some of the different types of sequence variants, what sort of genetic testing might be used to identify these changes? All of you listening in today likely are familiar with one or more of these tests from your own genetic testing journey. And all of these tests are typically done using blood or saliva samples, as you might know. The first test that I want to talk about is karyotype. A karyotype is a test that we used to use quite frequently, but we use a little less often now. And it's a test that actually looks at the chromosomes under the microscope. It can identify large copy number variants, so large missing or extra pieces along those chromosomes, or even a whole missing or a whole extra chromosome, like an extra chromosome 21 that causes Down syndrome. So this is sort of the most zoomed out view of a person's genetic material that we can take. If we zoom in a little bit further, we can do a test called a chromosomal microarray. And this test can detect smaller copy number variants, so smaller missing or extra pieces compared to the karyotype. If we want to actually read through the letters of someone's DNA, we have to zoom in even more and use a technology called sequencing. Gene panels use sequencing to look at variants in a specific list of genes that are tied to certain health conditions or developmental differences like seizures, autism, developmental delay. Another type of test that uses sequencing is called exome sequencing. Exome sequencing uses sequencing to look for variants in all parts of our genes that provide our body with instructions. These parts of genes that provide us with instructions are called our exons, and if we look at all of them, we call that our exome. So exome sequencing looks at all of those pieces of the body that provide us with instructions for our proteins. So whenever you have genetic testing, if you identify a genetic change in a specific gene or a copy number variant that involves maybe one or a few genes, the next step for the genetic testing laboratory is to interpret that variant or to try to determine if it impacts how the gene works in the body and if it could be associated with a health condition, a developmental difference, or a risk for a condition in the future. As I mentioned earlier in my talk, we all have lots of genetic variants. Many of them just make us who we are, and only some will impact our health and development while others don't. So when a lab sees a genetic change, they try to use all of the information that they have available to them to try and determine if that genetic change might be associated with health or developmental differences. This means that they look at things like, how does that genetic change impact the protein? Does it cause a frame shift? Is it a missense variant? They look at where it's located in the protein. Is that a piece that's important for that protein's job in the body? They look to see if that genetic change has been seen in other children with similar symptoms or health concerns. They look to see if it's been seen in the general population. And then they try to put all of this information together to assign an interpretation to that variant, or what they think about its relationship to health. Interpretations from genetic testing laboratories primarily fall into 3 categories: benign, uncertain, and pathogenic. Benign means that the copy number variant or sequence variant is not known to cause any significant health or developmental differences. Pathogenic means that this copy number or sequence variant is believed to cause symptoms or features. If there's not enough information to put a variant into those categories where we say, yes, it's tied to health or development, nope, we don't think it's related, we have to call it uncertain. If we don't know enough to say one way or another, we say that's a variant of uncertain significance, or a VUS. This means, again, that there's not enough information for us to say if the variant is tied to health or development, and that more information is needed. Our hope is that over time, we'll be able to better understand that uncertain result and to put it into a more concrete category, but sometimes that just takes time. We need to learn more. Other times we can recommend or offer things like parental testing to help inform uncertain results. If parental testing or testing mom and dad wasn't done as part of initial testing, this can help clarify things in some cases. Understanding if the variant was inherited from a parent or if it's new and unique to the child can help us better understand that variant and its link to health or developmental differences. So on to some other common terms you might see on reports. So first, on your reports, you might see the terms autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, and X-linked. To walk through these terms, I wanted to first return to this slide that you saw a little bit earlier today. As a reminder, we all have 2 copies of the first 22 pairs of chromosomes. We have 2 copies of each because we get one from our mother and one from our father. So for all of the genes that are packaged into these 22 chromosomes, we typically have 2 copies of those genes, one from mom, one from dad. Again, our last set of chromosomes are our sex chromosomes, with females typically having 2 X chromosomes. So they typically have 2 copies of all of the genes that are packaged into those X chromosomes. And males typically have an X and a Y, so they have 1 copy of the genes that are on that X chromosome. Autosomal dominant and autosomal recessive are used to describe conditions caused by changes in genes that are on those first 22 pairs of chromosomes. Conditions that are caused by having a pathogenic variant in 1 copy of the gene are called autosomal dominant. If you need to have a pathogenic variant in both copies of the gene, this is called autosomal recessive. Conditions caused by pathogenic variants in a gene on the X chromosome are called X-linked. Symptoms can differ between males and females because females typically have 2 copies of this gene, while males typically just have 1 copy. They only have that 1 X. Sometimes autosomal recessive, autosomal dominant, and X-linked are called inheritance patterns. But these alone don't tell us if a genetic variant was inherited from a parent or whether the variant was found on 1 or both copies of the gene. They're really just used to help us understand if having 1 pathogenic variant causes a condition, or if you need to have pathogenic variants on both copies of a gene to cause a condition, and whether the gene is located on those first 22 pairs of chromosomes or on that last pair, those sex chromosomes. The words heterozygous, homozygous, and hemizygous that are seen on some genetic test reports tell us about the specific individual who was tested. If the genetic variant was found on 1 copy of a gene, we use the term heterozygous. Homozygous tells us that a person has the change on both copies of their gene, and hemizygous is used to describe a male that has the genetic variant on his only X chromosome. On your report, you might also see the words inherited or de novo, and these terms help us to understand if a genetic variant was inherited from a parent. We determine if a genetic change was inherited or new to a child by testing the parents for that variant. If the variant was passed on, so we see it in mom or in dad, we say that that genetic change was inherited. As many of you might know, some genetic changes are new and unique to a child, meaning that they weren't inherited from mom or dad, but they happened early on in the sperm, in the egg, or early on in development. Whenever a change is new and unique to a child, we call these de novo variants, because de novo means anew in Latin. So it's an old Latin term that's sort of stuck in genetics, but it just means new and unique to the child. Finally, a few families might have the words mosaicism or mosaic noted on their report. Mosaicism means that only some of a person's cells have the genetic variant. Some cells have the variant, some do not. For some families, this might have been identified through their testing, that when looking at a blood sample or a saliva sample, the genetic testing laboratory only saw the genetic change in some of the cells. With our current testing technology, if we detect mosaicism, we often can't say which cells in the body have the genetic change, or really how many cells in the body have the genetic variant. But this is something that might be reported on some people's reports, so I wanted to be sure to mention it. Sometimes we also might come to learn that a parent has a specific type of mosaicism called germline mosaicism. This means that more than one of a mother's egg cells or more than one of a father's sperm cells, what we call their germline, have the genetic variant. Our current technology doesn't allow us to detect germline mosaicism through our testing of blood or saliva samples, but sometimes this is identified when parents have more than one child with the same genetic condition, but they themselves don't have the variant found in their blood or saliva samples. So we might think that the genetic change is new or unique to the child, but we come to learn that a parent has the genetic change in multiple of their sperm or eggs after they have multiple children with the same genetic variant. If a variant is found to be de novo in a child, so we find it in a child, test mom and dad, and neither of them have it in their blood or saliva sample, we say that there's less than a 1% chance for them to have another child with that same genetic change. Again, a family might have more than one child with that genetic change because of this germline mosaicism. So now that we've walked through many genetic concepts in a relatively short amount of time, I want to turn it over to Rebecca to walk through an example report to help put some of what we talked about into a bit more context, to walk through a report with you, to try and drive some of these terms home and help you walk through your laboratory reports. And then of course, we'll be available for questions after we walk through an example.
Great, thank you for that wonderful background, Julianne. So like she said, one of the most common questions that we get here at Searchlight is, how do we read our genetic testing report? And at first look, it can certainly be overwhelming to try to make sense of all these parts and pieces, but we do hope to break it down for you in a meaningful way where all of these parts can be understood. Lab reports from different labs may look slightly different from each other, but they're all made up of the same parts. We'll use an example today from one of the labs we see reports from most often, called GeneDx. And so what's a better place to start than at the top? At the top, you'll see all of the demographic information. So your child's name, birthday, the type of sample that was used. So that may be blood or a buccal sample, which would be like a cheek swab. You'll also see the dates of the whole genetic testing process. So when that sample was collected, when it arrived at the lab, and then when the report was made. And this is important because we're learning more and more about genetics every single day. So if this report is over 2 years old, well then maybe it's time to ask your genetics provider to review it, because we may know more information now than when the report was initially made. And then moving down, the next thing that you'll see is the test that was ordered. And we already covered this, but I'd like to review it just again. There are three main types of testing that we see here at Simon's Searchlight. The first result that we can see are on chromosomal microarrays. So this is that test that's looking for any missing or extra pieces that we call deletions or duplications. We know that this change in the amount of somebody's DNA can change how their body works and can result in things like medical and developmental changes. You can see here the list of copy number variants that this test would find that we accept here at Simon's Searchlight. Moving on, other types of testing we can see are both gene panels and whole exome sequencing. And as a reminder, these are the tests that read through the letters of the DNA. Gene panels are looking at specific genes that we know are related to a specific health or developmental condition. So some people may have had panels looking at genes related to epilepsy or autism and developmental differences. Other individuals may have had whole exome sequencing, and that's reading through all of the letters of all of their genes throughout their DNA. And this type of testing often would result in those sequence changes that we can see in any of the genes listed here. And so now, moving farther down, the next section is often called clinical indication. It may also be called relevant history or pertinent information. And this really just describes why the child is having genetic testing. It's often just a brief summary of their medical and developmental history. And then we move down and we get to the results of the testing. And this is often the media section. So we'll break this down piece by piece to review what all of these different parts mean. So we'll start on the left, and this is where we'll find the gene name. As we know, many genes in our body help our body work like it's supposed to. And this is an important first step in thinking about what any of these changes may do. We think, well, what does this gene do in our body? What instructions does it code for? Many of the genes that we see in Simon's Searchlight, for example, may help with brain development and brain growth. And so if we have a spelling change that breaks how this gene is working or changes how it works in our body, it makes sense then that it could lead to things like developmental differences. And then we'll move to the next box, which is labeled disorder or disease. And this tells us the name of the condition that results when somebody has a spelling change in that gene. This name is most helpful if you'd like to learn more about what it means. This is the name that you would type into a search engine, for example, to look up more information. Down in the sections below this box is often a summary and interpretation section. That's when you'll find the most details about what this specific condition actually is and what are those associated signs and symptoms. All right, and continuing on, the next box is labeled mode of inheritance. And for this section, we're jumping back to information we already reviewed today, but I'd like to cover again. So as a reminder, we all have 2 copies of each of our genes. We inherit one from our mothers and one from our fathers. It's totally random what copy we get from each of our parents and ultimately what copy we may pass on to any children. And our body uses both of these copies to work like it's supposed to. There are 3 main types of conditions that we see at Simon's Searchlight. The first is called autosomal dominant, and this is most of the changes that we see here. This means that of somebody's 2 copies, 1 has a spelling change, and that's enough to affect how their body is working. We can also see autosomal recessive inheritance, and so this is when both copies of that spelling change are present on both of those genes. Oftentimes, with these autosomal recessive conditions, each parent only has 1 gene change. They're called carriers, and most times, those mothers and fathers don't show us any signs of the condition. It's only when both changes are passed down to the child that we see signs of the genetic changes. And then finally, we have changes that can be inherited on our sex chromosomes, so those X chromosomes. We call that X-linked inheritance, and as we reviewed, males typically show more significant signs and symptoms if they have a gene change on that X chromosome, because they don't have that backup X chromosome that females do. All right, so we're going back to our report and making our way through. We'll move on to our next box, which is labeled variant. And this tells us that very specific gene change that we found, that spelling difference that we can think about both in terms of the DNA letter that's changed, but also the difference on the protein level and how that amino acid is changing. And then we'll continue on to zygosity. And this is going back again to that autosomal dominant and recessive. This is telling us how many changes somebody has. So again, if somebody is heterozygous, that means that there's a change on one of their chromosomes. Most often, this relates to autosomal dominant conditions. If somebody is called homozygous, that means they have those two gene changes, and that most often corresponds to autosomal recessive conditions. And then when we get to the box that says inherited from, that's really getting at the question of, well, where did this gene change come from? Sometimes these gene changes are inherited from a parent. And depending on what the specific change or variant is, that parent may show us the same signs as their child. They may show us different signs or symptoms that their child doesn't, or they may show us no signs at all. This is also how your provider would be able to tell you, well, what are the chances that any other or future children would have this same genetic change? Many families may be interested in this information for family planning. It's also possible that these gene changes may be brand new, only in the child, and was not inherited from a parent. This is what we call de novo. And in these cases, the chance for any other or future children to have the same change is often quite low. And it's very important to remember with these genetics that these changes are totally random by chance changes that occur. There's nothing that anybody does or doesn't do that causes them. And we also have no control over what DNA we pass on to our children. And then lastly, we get to classification. And this is how your medical providers determine what the change is or isn't doing in somebody's body. And like Julianne reviewed for us, there are 5 main classifications. And these labels just really have to do with how confident are we that this change is the answer for that child's developmental or medical differences. Most often, changes that are benign or likely benign aren't reported because we think that's not our genetic answer. We can also have changes that are called VUSs, or variants of uncertain significance. These are essentially inconclusive results. And these are those genetic changes that we just don't have enough research yet to know exactly what they mean. But we hope that in the future, as we learn more, we'll be able to provide these families additional information as to whether or not this change is that child's answer. And then finally, we have pathogenic and likely pathogenic gene changes. And these are those results that we're confident are changing the way that that child's body is working and is our genetic explanation for why those child has those medical or developmental differences. And then as you look to the bottom of your report, you'll find these usually large sections titled Interpretation and Summary. And this is really where you get a lot of the information about, well, what is this gene doing in the body? And when there are gene changes, what have we seen? What are associated medical findings or developmental differences that we see in other individuals? Your provider will also be able to use this information to guide management moving forward, whether that means seeing other providers or keeping your child enrolled in all of the services and therapies that they're already involved in. All right. And now it is possible that some of our families here today may have had a chromosomal microarray report. And so I wanted to just briefly mention it right here to show you that this is what it looks like. While many of the pieces are similar, it does have some different sections. But I just wanted to bring it up to say that if you have one of these reports, we are more than happy to walk it through with you, because it's possible that somebody could have a deletion or a missing section that encompasses one of the genes we're talking about today. So don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you'd like to walk through these parts and pieces as well. All right, and we've made it to the end. So we hope that today's presentation has been helpful in making a little bit more sense and meaning out of these really complex genetics. If you have any additional questions specific to your own child's report, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at our email here, and one of our genetic counselors will be in touch shortly. Thank you for watching.
All right, great. Thank you so much to Jules and Becky for that great presentation. We've already got questions rolling in, so I'll just start off with the first one. This participant asks, my son's variant is on the start codon, typically, I may mispronounce this, methionine ATG. He has a GTG instead. Does this mean that essentially no transcription translation takes place and zero protein is made, or can it be created downstream on the MED13L gene and result in a partial protein formation? I'm curious if the nature of this mutation is responsible for his level of severity, since he has received maximum therapy interventions with minimal progress shown.
What great questions packed in there. So Becky, I can take a stab, and if you have anything to add, does that sound okay? So we didn't get into start codon variants in the slides today, so this is a good one to talk a little bit about. So just like we talked about that stop signal, but it tells the body when to stop making that protein, we also have go symbols or start symbols that tell the body where to start making the protein. So it sounds like in your son that start signal is changed, and you're wondering if that would cause what that would cause, I guess. So that would tell us that the translation or the creation of that protein is likely impacted. His gene isn't telling the body to start making that protein. This is consistent with other changes in the MED13L gene that we feel like they cause loss of function, either loss of protein expression or a protein that might be shorter than typical. It is always possible that maybe there's a start signal farther down that might start to do things, but I think all in all, him not having that typical start signal tells us that this protein is unlikely to work in the same way as typical. Now, to the second piece of your question, could this really tell us anything about his specific symptoms or the things that he's had to deal with? And I think that we often struggle to really define those genotype-phenotype correlations, that's what we call them, or what genetic changes, are more severe than others, because we know that the MED13L gene is just one of 20,000 other genes, and even two people who have the exact same change are going to look different because of all the other genetic factors. So I think it's hard to know if his specific genetic change might be responsible for some differences that you might be seeing when comparing him to other kids with changes in the MED13L gene.
Thank you. So the next question, I think may have been covered, but could possibly use some more detail. This person is asking, on my child's report, there's a variant that starts with a P dot and a coding DNA that starts with a C dot. What's the difference?
So I'll take this one, Becky, if that's okay. Chime in as you would like. So great question, and I think we did walk through this, but this is one question that we get so frequently, and we certainly should repeat it. So those are just two different ways of describing the variant. So the P dot tells us the change that happens in the protein, whereas the C dot tells us what's going on in the DNA. So as a reminder, genes code for proteins. So if there's a change in the DNA, it typically causes a change in the protein as well. So the C says, okay, we're looking at DNA. P, we're looking at protein. Good question.
Thank you. The next question is asking, are all the variants the same in all of the affected cells when it comes to germline mosaicism?
These are really fabulous questions. So thanks for these. So if a parent has germline mosaicism for a genetic change, so we think that multiple eggs in mom or multiple sperm in dad have a change in, let's use MED13L just because we were talking about that one a moments ago, we would expect it to be that same genetic change in the multiple eggs or sperm. Now, it's possible that our eggs and sperm might have different genetic changes across different eggs and sperm, but when we're talking about that germline mosaicism, we do expect them to have that same genetic change.
Great. And this next question is, can you give an example when a review of a 2-year-old test could somehow change the diagnosis or prescription or anything about the originally identified condition?
Sure, so I can go ahead and tackle this one. We think about reviewing this testing most often for those results that may have been uncertain originally, where we were just waiting for more information to decide, is this our answer or isn't it? In those past 2 years, more people have had genetic testing. We've had more research come out. And so sometimes we're able to use that information to know if that is our answer for the child. So just being able to relook at all of those people who have had testing and what new research we have, it may help us better guide management or future expectations for that child.
Great, thank you, Becky. Okay, the next question, when you mentioned that we can request for our genetic report to be reviewed again, does that mean for resequencing to take place? Most companies won't do that without an additional charge. I'm wondering when would be the best time for that to take place?
Which is also a wonderful question. So we're seeing more labs start to offer that reanalysis service. And our hope is that eventually all the labs will be doing that. Unfortunately, right now, like you said, there are many that don't. And so my answer is kind of twofold to say, even if the company can't do it, your genetics provider will be able to look at that very specific change and do some research to say, have we seen anybody else with this new change since then? What does our new research tell us? So it doesn't necessarily have to be through the lab. That being said, sometimes what labs will do is they'll reread through all those letters. So not just the specific change that we found before. And that can be helpful because, well, maybe we learned about a new gene in the last 2 years that we wouldn't have flagged before. And so in these cases, if that company doesn't offer a free reanalysis, and we have to think about, well, if my family's gonna pay for it, when is the best time to do it? In most cases, it makes sense to wait a little bit because we'll certainly know more 5 years from now than we will 2 years from now. And so that's absolutely a conversation you could have with your genetics provider to figure out where that sweet spot is for your family.
Great, thank you. And I'm not sure if Wendy's on the line for this next question. It may be something Jules or Becky can tackle, but just priming her in case. When you say these genetic changes are fully random, I wonder about my son's case. I received a pelvic x-ray a few days before he was conceived, and radiologists have told me that his mutation could have been caused by the radiation damaging the egg that was ready to be released. Do you concur that this is a possibility?
I think the bottom line is we don't know. Just to normalize this a bit, and I can put myself out there. So I've done this experiment myself, checking my own 2 sons and checking myself and my husband to see what's different about my children than I or my husband. And depending on which one of my sons, we've got about 100 to 150 genetic changes in the kids that we don't have. And as far as I know, I didn't have any radiation x-rays or anything around the time I was conceiving or early pregnant. So just to know, this happens with all of us. We're not perfect, we're humans. We try and we do a pretty good job of correcting these things, but we don't catch all of them. So maybe, maybe not. It's really hard to say. I wish I had a better answer. I think the important thing from my point of view as a mom is move on. This is not something that you're going to be able to fix or undo either way. And I think we all just need to look forward in terms of trying to figure out better supports for our kiddos and perhaps someday getting to treatment. So don't beat yourself up over it. Just keep going on.
Thanks, Wendy. Okay, and we are running short on time, so I'm going to read as many questions out as I can, and then just like with Karen Beer's presentation, we will answer any questions and send out the answers after the meeting. So I'll start with the next question up. You said when you have a nonsense variant, it tells the protein to stop early. Does that mean that where that nonsense variant is on the DNA, it will determine the severity of the genetic change?
So you're exactly right. Nonsense variants, like we talked about, they cause the protein to be shorter than typical. And those proteins that are shorter than typical often aren't able to still do their job in the body because they're actually decayed. So the body recognizes that it's smaller than typical and just gets rid of it. Very rarely, it still might exist in the cells, but just be a little bit shorter than typical. And if it is shorter, it might still be unable to do its job. So even, so the vast majority of them we feel like are going to cause that protein to be sort of recycled in the body because it's shorter than typical. Some might still survive and try to be doing their job. So that's sort of as a whole for nonsense variants, how we look at them. I think that answered the question. Becky, do you have anything to add there?
Nope, that was beautiful.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm going to read these last two questions because they were from the same person, and I think these might be our last two. But the first is, if my child has 7 variants of uncertain significance and their test was done 5 years ago, do I need to follow up to see if they can be classified as benign or pathogenic now?
That's a perfect example of when it would be great to check with your provider. And even if we're not able to fully move them to pathogenic or benign, maybe they'll be able to kind of weigh it out with you to say, I'm most interested in these ones not so much.
Great. And then the final question, can you test for germline mosaicism?
So unfortunately, we just don't have the technology at this point to test for germline mosaicism. So I wanted to mention it because I know that some of the families that are on might have had germline mosaicism identified after having multiple children with the same condition, but it isn't something that our technology tests for at this point. I want to mention too that most de novo variants are just in 1 egg or 1 sperm, so it's unlikely that this is the case, but for some families, we do know that this explains why they have multiple children with the same condition. I think in scrolling through the questions, there's some others about mosaicism in general. So sometimes with our testing, we can pick up if maybe some blood cells or some cheek swab some cells picked up in the cheek swab have the genetic change. So that type of mosaicism can sometimes be detected through our testing, but specifically knowing multiple eggs or multiple sperm mosaicism, that's not something that's picked up.